Okay, hello, welcome to the ODI Friday lunchtime lecture. I'm Fintan O'Donnell, a senior data technologist here at the ODI. Yeah, thanks for giving up on your lunchtime break or whatever, and also thanks to anyone watching the live stream as well. Today we have to introduce Pete Sherlock from the Shared Data Unit, assistant editor at the Shared Data Unit, which is an industry partnership between the BBC and the UK's regional media. He'll be talking about how the BBC are using data to upskill local journalists. If you have questions, please save them until after, and I'll be passing the mic around, and we're doing them then. And also, if you're watching the live stream, you can tweet in questions using the hashtag ODI Fridays. Take it away, Pete.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. So my name is Pete Sherlock. I'm the assistant editor of the BBC's new Shared Data Unit, which is based in Birmingham. A little bit about me. I started my journalism career in regional newspapers. I worked across East London, Hackney Gazette, East London Advertiser. I joined the BBC around about 8 years ago now, and I've primarily worked for the website as a sub-editor, news editor. And then about 4 years ago, I moved into data journalism, specifically using computer science techniques to find stories within data sets. So I'm here today to tell you about the BBC's new local news partnerships, which is a venture into collaborative journalism, and a key aim of which is to work with news organisations to improve data literacy skills throughout the industry. So I'm going to talk about how we got there, what we plan to achieve in the future, and some of the lessons we've learned about collaborative journalism along the way. But to start with, I want to tell you about the most rewarding day of my working life so far at the BBC, which happened not so long ago. And my team had just published a data journalism investigation into the UK bus network. And we used data from the Department for Transport to show that the bus network had been eroded to its lowest level for almost 30 years, that bus routes had closed, and particularly rural areas were finding themselves with no bus network to speak of. And it's a good story. It was used across the BBC network and beyond. But it was the kind of public interest story that the BBC does day in, day out. It's our meat and drink, really. So why did I find this so unusual? Why was it so rewarding? Well, it signalled the start of a new era for public service reporting in the UK. It was the culmination of the innovative new partnership between the BBC and the regional news media sector. And when we thought about it, what we'd done was pretty radical. So here's why. This story was put together by journalists from 3 separate UK publishing companies. We had Annette Belcher from Trinity Mirror, Paul Lynch from Johnston Press, and Claire Wilde from Archant. And those 3 reporters had worked alongside my core BBC team to produce this story, to analyse the data behind this story. They had spent 3 months on secondment at the BBC in Birmingham learning data journalism techniques. And at the same time, the story was shared with 800 regional media outlets who have signed up to receive free content on our local news partnership scheme. So what had we done? Well, we had brought together traditional rivals under a collaborative umbrella to produce stories of public interest for our local audiences. We had given journalists the time to work on off-diary data investigations. And we had proved that in an industry traditionally driven by competition, collaboration has a place. And the result for us was better journalism, better local journalism for our audiences. So I think that's pretty radical. I just wanted to very quickly share a short video of those first secondees, their experience of being thrown into the world of data at the BBC. Bear with me 2 secs, I need to turn that up. We're not getting the volume on that, are we? No. I'll skip that. That was just a short video of our secundees at a data conference that we had, explaining some of the things that they had learned. So let me rewind. How did we get here? Let me just go back to my slides. So the shared data unit is the culmination of talks with the region, of a project which has come about after years of talks with the regional media sector in the UK. And it involves three key initiatives: a local democracy reporting service, the shared data unit, and the video bank, which is a facility which opens up BBC video and audio to local news partners. So every part of the news sector was involved in developing the plans, from the main press publishers represented by the trade body, the New Media Association, to news agencies, commercial television and radio. And the aim was to extend the reach of BBC journalism, support local news generally, and build a better understanding of local democracy. So the first of these plans is the Local Democracy Reporting Service. You may have heard of this. The idea is reasonably simple. It's the creation of 150 local democracy reporting jobs. The journalists are funded by the BBC, but based and employed by local news organisations. And their remit is to cover the workings of town halls in their local patches, as well as other local public institutions such as health trusts and mayoralties. They file copy to an agency feed, which is available to all the media organisations who have signed up to receive free content under the scheme. We now have more than 90 media organisations representing something like 900 titles who are local news partners. And that is across the spectrum, from small community websites to hyperlocals, through to some of the main news providers across print, online, radio and television. So it's like a franchise, different companies with different approaches, but using common editorial standards and publishing into the same system. So the BBC uses this copy, the partners use this copy, and the core purpose is to provide impartial coverage of the workings of local authorities in the UK. The democracy reporters have now filed more than 15,000 stories of public interest, which are being widely picked up across the national news media. That's more than 15,000 stories that would have otherwise been untold. And that's 15,000 stories aimed at strengthening the public's knowledge and understanding of local democracy. The second key initiative is the News Hub. So that offers local news partners access to BBC audio and video content directly after transmission. So when regional news or radio programmes have been broadcast, they are uploaded to a system, a portal, which is accessible by the local news partners, who can download that and can use it for their websites for free. So the News Hub is designed to enhance partners' websites, as well as making BBC output more accessible and to a wider audience. And then we come to the shared data unit, which is where I come in. So the SDU has been up and running since September 2017, and we have two key purposes, which is content creation and training. So if I start with the first of those, content creation, our remit is to tell public interest stories from open data sources. Why did we set up the data unit? Why data? Well, when we embarked on this project, we identified a problem, and it's a problem summed up by the results of a survey which was conducted by a UK data science company last year. And they found that if you put a spreadsheet in front of people, more than 80% of people just don't know how to interpret it. They wouldn't be able to find any insights within that spreadsheet. They wouldn't be able to tell you any trends, what it meant, certainly not find any potential stories within it. I think that's a big problem for society, but I think it's an even bigger problem for journalists who are trying to explain the world around them to their audiences. And I don't think we can blame the authorities. Personally, this is the Governmental Open Data Index, and the UK comes, I've lost it, but I think it's about 7th in terms of, tucked between Canada and Australia, in terms of how much of its data it makes available to the public. We also have the government data portal, gov.uk, which now has more than 36,000 data sets representing 25 ministerial departments, 395 agencies and public bodies, and 12 public corporations, including the BBC. And yeah, I think here's a sobering fact. Of those 36,000 data sets, 93% have been opened less than 10 times, and only 29 have had 10,000 plus downloads. So that's thousands of data sets with information about our lives, from the state of our hospitals, to the performance of our schools, to the crime in our neighbourhoods, and most of it is sitting there unexamined and untouched. At the Shared Data Unit, we passionately believe journalists should have the skills to interrogate such a rich new source of information and have the time to explain and unpack its implications. So far in the year we've been going, we've analysed data sets from the NHS on crime, on teaching, on transport. We've shown how neighbourhood policing has been disproportionately affected by government cuts. We've shown how the number of EU workers in the NHS leaving the NHS has increased since the Brexit vote. We've shown the proliferation of takeaways on our high streets. We've looked at GPs' bid to extend opening hours and how they're performing in meeting those targets. And we've looked at mental health of students at universities. For each of these topics, the team prepares a story pack which serves as a toolkit for journalists. And those packs contain all the key information that a journalist would need to tell that story. So quotes from interested parties, expert opinion, the data, pictures, and even video at times. And all local news partners are free to use any elements of those toolkit to put together a story which resonates with their region. So alongside those story packs, we share a spreadsheet and a guide to that spreadsheet so that a local reporter can find the angles that are pertinent to their audience. We are not being prescriptive in terms of top lines. We are trying to enable stories from data sets. So when we share a story pack, we will often find that around 40 to 50 local news providers pick up on a story which we may be reporting with a UK top line on the BBC, and they will be following up with stories about Yorkshire or London boroughs or East Anglia or whoever. We've now generated more than 450 stories across print, online, TV and radio. So that's the bus story being used in the local press, and a story about NHS payouts. So we've created front pages across local news. We're open and transparent with everything we do. So we have a GitHub page, GitHub repository, where we upload all our data, all our scripts, and any other elements that we can. It's just BBC Shared Data Unit if you Google that, and GitHub. And we encourage our audience to use our data to find new insights, build new interactives or visualizations. We also have a Pinterest page where all our stories are collated. It's just England in numbers. So you can find some of the stuff we've been doing there. So I mentioned that we have two key initiatives, content creation. The second one was training. So we have a big ambition at the Shared Data Unit. We want to create the next generation of local data journalists in the UK. So Of course, we know there are many local journalists with these skills already. The Trinity Mirror Data Unit, for example, has built up an enviable reputation for making brilliant award-winning interactives and breaking data stories every day. And there's Bureau Local, a project run by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which for the last year or two has been building up a network of reporters and training them in data journalism techniques. But we identified in some parts of the local media landscape, journalists do lack the skills to interrogate data, which is obviously an increasingly important skill in the digital age. And for those of us that believe in a strong local news sector, widening that pool of expertise can only be a good thing for our audiences. So all year round, we bring in journalists from the local press on 3-month secondments. The first secondees who worked on the bus story joined the unit in November 2017, and they picked up a wide range of skills through a mix of formal day-to-day training and a mentoring with the core BBC SDU team. So during their 12 weeks, they learn how to clean, analyse, visualise data, as well as moving on to more advanced techniques towards the end of the 12 weeks, such as scraping, a little bit of coding. Our next secondments, we're going to introduce a 3-day introduction to R. And we've invited speakers from across the field of open data, from open corporates to OpenStreetMap, the ONS, and various other experts who have come to speak to us secondees about data and its application in wider society. And so that training brings me back to the start of the presentation, which was that Friday afternoon when we contemplated how far we had come with the publication of that bus story, bringing together journalists from different organisations. And that's when we realised that we had done something pretty radical. We had published a public interest story for local audiences, and that was 4 media companies coming together. It was proof that in certain parts of the media, collaboration across newsrooms can bring huge benefits to audiences. And of course, we're not taking away the idea that journalists are desperate for the exclusive. That's our meat and drink, and it's what brings many journalists into the trade. There will always be that healthy competition, but increasingly news organisations are seeking to cooperate in some aspects, particularly in areas of investigative and long-form reporting. And data journalism in particular seems to fit that mould for several reasons. I guess firstly, a large data investigation can be costly and time-consuming, and secondly, it is important to bring together people with different skills. There are no unicorns, the name given to people who can code and visualise and put together a good story and design the data and build beautiful graphics. They just don't exist. So bringing together people from different disciplines can help that. And by pooling resources and skills, we are doing work that we perhaps otherwise would not be able to do. So I just want to move on to some lessons I've learned in this first year from collaborative journalism. Collaboration is not only possible, but it is becoming mainstream. So I want to just throw out there, does anyone know when the first major collaborative journalism project took place? Any guesses? No. It was actually 1846. So back then there were 5 daily newspapers in New York who came together to help cover the costs of sending reporters to the Mexican border to cover the US-Mexican War. And they later called themselves the Associated Press, a news agency which has since gone on to pick up 52 Pulitzer Prizes since its formation. But I guess it's fair to say that it's only in recent years that we've seen a shift in intention and scale when it comes to collaborative journalism. And in some quarters, it's now being practiced on a scale that probably constitutes a revolution. In fact, Sarah Stonebelly from the Centre for Cooperative Media has said, while lessons are still being learned, collaborative journalism has evolved from experiment to common practice. And of course, we've just seen the largest collaborative reporting project in history with the Panama Papers reporting, which involved more than 100 media partners working together, working in 25 languages across 80 countries. So secondly, you can maintain autonomy and editorial independence. So the BBC wants this to be a working partnership with the regional press. We have a steering group of key stakeholders that meet regularly to address any concerns that may arise. We have content meetings with local news partners, editors who can suggest topics that should be explored by our data journalism team. But we do insist on maintaining overall editorial control of the projects that we embark upon. Once we have shared content, partners are free to treat that material in any way they like. They can slice and dice video and as they see fit, for example, as long as that material is not misrepresented to the detriment of the BBC. Thirdly, successful partnerships fulfill a need on both sides. So what does the regional press in the UK get from the BBC? Well, its journalists benefit from the BBC's training and expertise. We take 3 journalists at a time on the 3-month secondments, so that's 12 journalists a year who will be significantly upskilled in data journalism techniques. Those newspapers, radio and television stations also benefit from the free content that we provide, which is strong public interest data journalism that can lead their bulletins and make front page splashes in local newspapers. We all know that local news providers have been through a tough time financially as they seek to find new business models. And with resources stretched thin, it's difficult sometimes to fund investigative reporting on the scale that we're looking at, or indeed cover every town hall meeting, which is where the LDRs fit in. So we can help address that. And successful partnerships fill a need on both sides. So what does the BBC get? Well, we get tremendous extra reach for our journalism. The New Media Association, which represents the UK regional press, it's a huge 5 billion sector read by 48 million adults every week in print and online. So that represents a tremendous extra reach for the BBC's journalism. And we also have a remit to strengthen local news for our audiences. And through distributing free content to local titles, we are doing exactly that. And through running secondments, we're improving the technical skills across the industry. We are, as I said, we are aiming to create the next generation of local data journalists looking at this kind of stuff. Fourthly, I'd say be open to where the partnership takes you. So breaking down traditional rivalries, getting everybody around the table is not easy at first. And like I said, it goes against that reporter's drive for exclusives, for getting the scoop ahead of the rivals. But I would say collaboration takes you to unusual places. I think after the initial culture shock, by breaking down barriers, you can change culture within your organisation. You can drive innovation. You can cross-pollinate ideas and techniques. And by opening up that conversation, you're doing exactly that. And I think you come across unexpected benefits by working together. You realise you can actually sit around a table together, and you might even go for a drink afterwards. I say finally, at the SDU, we have a wider remit as data advocates, as we want to spread data skills throughout the industry and beyond. So we've already hosted 2 public hack days in Birmingham and Manchester. We're hoping to do one in Salford. Last time in Manchester, we worked with Open Contracting and Open Corporates to look at government procurement data. And we brought in members of the public and some academics and some experts from within the field, and have come up with some really interesting story leads looking at procurement data, which sounds like the driest subject in the world, and I thought it was going to be when we started off, but actually we've started to find some really interesting things, certain trends, for example, in terms of UK police forces starting to use, starting to pay a lot of money towards data science companies to look at intelligence policing and areas like that. So you suddenly see in police force contracting budgets, money going to like tech firms in Silicon Valley and stuff. And there's really interesting trends that we can do from looking at procurement data, which is available, but not a lot of people know how to find it or how to where it sits and how to analyze it when you get it. We're also holding data conferences in which we're trying to bring together experts, and we are looking to host a data journalism conference in Birmingham in hopefully the new year, in late January, early February, in which we'll make tickets available on Eventbrite. And we're also trying to continue to develop our training scheme, our series of secondments. They're ongoing throughout the year. We're really interested in getting as many different speakers from as many different fields from open data as possible. So if anyone's interested in coming and chatting to our secondees, or if there is certain elements of training you think we should be looking at, or story ideas, we at the Shared Data Unit are all about collaboration. We want to hear from from everybody within the sphere. And so yeah, please do get in touch. And I wanted to finish on a quote from Charles Lewis, who worked on the Panama Papers, who sums up why collaboration is not only becoming mainstream, but it's sort of becoming essential for news orgs as we are facing so many challenges. And he said, there is one simple operating principle within the consortium: collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. We are still only at the dawn of a new age. And amid a world of debilitating political dysfunction with the most dire potential consequences, the crucial concept of public accountability cannot and should not be narrowly confined by local or national borders, or the rigid structures, orthodoxies, conceits and insecurities of traditional journalism. That model is dying out. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch. You can follow. I'm on Twitter. I'm my peter.sherlock@bbc.co.uk, or the Shared Data Unit address is shared.dataunit@bbc.co.uk. That's our GitHub page where all our data and our various scripts and building blocks of all our stories is kept. And yeah, I'll move on to if anybody's got any questions as to how it all works. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pete. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll pass around the mic now, and just so you know, this mic isn't amplified in this room, but it's for the people listening back at home. So, well, you're closest.
Hi. That was great. I think that's one of the most public service things the BBC's done in recent years, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, sort of two questions. So it's clear the data's going outside the BBC to sort of local press, but is it used within the BBC locally?
Yeah, so we send out we send out a story pack and we send out a spreadsheet, and we send that out under a week-long embargo to all our local news partners and to all our regional teams within the BBC, and we say in a week's time you can all go with it. And amazingly, everyone's stuck to that embargo. So yeah.
Great. My second question was, what are your sort of frustrations with the project so far? I mean, how's the data availability or like tooling? Anything else that you're kind of finding, or is it all hunky dory?
Frustrations. Well, I think sometimes surfacing that data to an audience or to local news organisations who are not familiar with spreadsheets has been a challenge. So, sending a large spreadsheet to a news desk that are not familiar with how to sort and filter on that spreadsheet, or has been a challenge. So we've overcome that really by providing a kind of step-by-step guide to the spreadsheet. So we will say, this is how you find your local lines. Go into the spreadsheet, and we can be quite prescriptive about that. So, and that's obviously our aim is to get as much take up as possible for our stories. So the more we do that, the more take up we get. So that was a frustration at first, but I think we've kind of overcome that. Hi there.
Yeah, great talk. I'm going to be a little bit greedy. I've got 3 questions.
Sure.
First one is, and I'm not a journalist, but how do journalists sign up for training? Secondly, you talk about being like a council watch. And my experience of local council is the area of planning is really a bit of a nightmare, and I'm actually in a bit of a planning thing myself. And I just wonder if there's any data that you have that you know of that would perhaps make it more visible and transparent about planning development issues in local council. And the third one's a bit more philosophical, which is, in a world where we have all this data and we have fact checks, we still seem to be all arguing and putting a different bias on it, and it doesn't feel like actually having data is giving us a black and white world. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Uh-huh.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, what to take the first one. How do people apply for this scheme? So they have to be on the local news partnership scheme, so to begin with, and that's open to any bona fide news organisation in the UK who is providing regional news in the public interest. It's quite a simple application scheme. Once they're on that scheme, then they can then apply for secondments, and we distribute them at the start of the year across news organisations, depending based on certain criteria. So that is a commitment to, for example, a commitment to perhaps cascade that training down their newsroom when the secondees return. Various criteria like that. So but they're available to everybody on the scheme. So that's from like I said, from hyperlocals to some of the main publishers. Planning, yeah, that is. There's a lot of conversations that we've had in terms of how to surface or how to kind of get our heads around planning data. We've got various projects on the go in which we kind of maybe are trying to look at that. We've got a big FOI in looking at S106 money at the moment and planning gain money which hasn't been spent. But we're also kind of we're looking to as I mentioned, we're very up for collaboration, and I spoke to somebody recently who's based down in Kent, who was looking at doing some form of textual analysis of comments received by local authorities about their local plans. So trying to analyse whether the comments, the input that local people were having to the local plans was actually being translated into action. So I think we're trying to look at that sort of data, but it is because it varies from institution to institution, and because it often involves perhaps some scraping of that data. I think it's quite difficult to actually really get a grip of the whole scene. And the final question about whether data is kind of helping us to find a route out of this kind of fake news morass that we sort of find ourselves in. Is it making a difference? Do you mean? I think it is and it isn't. I think there are people with entrenched views who, whether you provide objective reporting based on data science techniques will inevitably overlook the methodology and still be rigid within their viewpoint. But I do think, from a personal point of view, I find the objectivity that we bring to our stories, and the openness and the transparency, and the fact that we open up our methodologies and open ourselves up for scrutiny and say, here's our data, this is how we reach these conclusions. You may reach a different conclusion. Come and challenge us if you do. I think that conversation is a really important first step in restoring trust in the news media. And I think that's why data journalism is the fastest single growth area in news desks across the globe.
I was wondering, how do you expand what you are doing with the shared data unit to other communities? I remembered around 2006, BBC had this initiative called BBC Backstage. I don't know if you were acquainted with that.
I'm not acquainted with that. No.
Well, it was basically, I mean, at that time BBC didn't have so many open data sets, but they had several, I must say. And what they did is they forged a community, mostly of people that were programmers that were interested in using that data to build, new constructs. Actually, some of them were bought by the BBC and they were used on their website. But I'm asking this because, I mean, there was a very successful community. It worked for 2 or 3 years. They've done, I mean, they did some of the things that you are saying, comparing data. Actually, you could compare how the news was changing during the day, lots of things. I'm wondering if this unit, or there are other initiatives around the BBC that are still working with this community of people that are much more closer to information systems, to programming, because I know journalists definitely they are becoming proficient, but still there is a long way to go. Perhaps with these people, there is I mean, we can accelerate that process.
I totally agree with you that there's a long way to go, and you know the technical skills that some of you guys are dealing with in terms of big data and AI, and we're a long way off from that in terms of being able to deal with data on that scale. The shared data unit was set up as a local news partnerships as very much a supporter of local news organisations. However, we've been going a year now, and I very much want to move into more of an area of data advocacy. And as I say, we are all about collaboration and opening up our doors. And we have held 2 public hack days now. We have invited people in from many different fields. From data scientists at Birmingham City University have come in, from the transport world around the West Midlands, we've even had some academics doing their geography PhDs who are interested in data, and we've had them come to some of our events and talk to them and open up conversations. And we're really open to ideas and potential collaborations if certain projects would work for us as well. Then we would be more than willing to listen to how we can work with people from outside of the journalism field, because I think any data journalism unit within journalism that shuts itself off from the wider data community would be absolutely doomed to fail.
I mean, take a look at BBC Backstage. I'm sure that there are some archives, and that could be really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I might ask a
Sure.
So you're on about you're trying to get journalists and encourage them into using like data skills, data analysis skills, blah blah blah. Is there much from the developer data science community in helping out? Maybe not becoming journalists, but picking up some journalist skills. Or are you trying to also get them into it, as opposed to just journalists and get them into data?
Yeah, I think primarily our focus is on getting journalists to be equipped with the skills to interrogate data on a day-to-day basis. I think that crossover of people from outside of journalism within the data world coming to us and learning about what we're interested in and the stories that work for our audiences, there's definitely that kind of cross conversation going on, and it's really interesting. You know, it's really interesting having that conversation. From, you know, we had a hack day in the West in Birmingham recently. It was about public transport, and one of the things they're introducing in Birmingham, or potentially, is it's up for consultation at the moment, but it's a traffic-free zone in the city centre. And some of the data scientists who had been working on that came in and were, kind of having a fairly heated conversation with the journalists about the presentation of how that had been reported in the news. And it's really interesting to see that from the outside. So we're definitely trying to open that conversation, but I think primarily our focus is on upskilling journalists.
Anyone else?
Hi there.
So who decides what projects are you going to work on in depth like this? And you did mention about advocacy. How do you decide who's right? So, the BBC has always tried to be impartial anyway. So, but then there's criticism that they often weigh it 50-50, whereas there's much more evidence on one side than another. So how do you handle all of that?
Sure. So I think that in terms of how we choose what we look at, we see that as an organic process. So we have the local news partnerships. We have which represents the 800 organisations. There is a steering group, and we will meet, and they will come up with possible content ideas. So ideas that they know will work for their local audiences. But also we will look at what people are talking about in the news, what we think would make a good data investigation on the back of what our audience analytics tells us people are interested in. And also we bring in journalists on the secondment who have their own ideas and specialisms. So at the moment we have a crime reporter who's looking at cuts to legal aid, the access to GPs extended hours was done by Nancy Cole, who's a health correspondent at ITV. That was her particular specialism that she came in and wanted to investigate. So we're not prescriptive. It's whether if an idea is good enough and we think it will meet our criteria, which is that it's UK-wide, that it works for a local audience, and it's of public interest, then then we'll pursue it. So the second question about the BBC coming, sort of taking a sort of 50-50 line, and he says that and she says that, and so there you go. I think that what we would say at the BBC is that due impartiality doesn't work like that. That we should be weighing up the evidence and the accepted scientific evidence on a particular issue, and giving due coverage to each side based on that evidence. So I think you may have seen that there was a recent BBC ruling about the way that and criticism of the way that the BBC had dealt with climate change in the past, and had given too much of that 50-50 treatment on news bulletins, and that is something that was looked at and assessed and reviewed, and we realised that that we had got wrong in the past. So it's a constant process, I think, in terms of assessing what due impartiality means.
So we're doing a presentation at our university for a data journalism class, and I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you think data journalism could improve the world. That's our topic, is can data journalism improve or change the world?
Okay. Can it improve the world? Well, I think so. Well, I mean, I'm a passionate believer in giving people the information to make better decisions about their lives, whether that's on a local or a national level. And I think data journalism in particular can do that very well. So because of its very nature, you can get very granular with data journalism, and most news can pass people by. It feels on a much grander scale. It feels perhaps national or global, and what does this mean to me? And I think with data journalism, whether you're making a widget which people can find out what the crime is in their neighbourhood, or how the waiting list at their local hospital compares regionally and nationally, or as simple as the state of their potholes in their roads, you can give local communities that granular information, and I think that's empowering. So I think data journalism succeeds on a level which other journalism wasn't reaching.
Oh shit. If that's it, then that's anyone else? No. Then can we give Peter a round of applause?
Thanks so much.
And thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Cheers.